The iPod Touch 4th generation was released on September 1st, 2010, with a thinner design as well as FaceTime. It was the last iPod Touch to be released on Steve Jobs' watch. It became prevalent as you could do more things on the iPod Touch apart from the iPhone, but the iPod Touch 4 didn't last long. Hey guys, it's Ethan from Alumni Tech 47, and today we are going to be looking at this iPod Touch 4th generation and see if it's even useful almost 10 years later. Before we get started, you should go follow me on Twitter and Instagram at AlumniTech47 so you can see behind the scenes of this channel as well as live updates. I'll link them down below so you can go check me out. Now, the iPod Touch 4th generation was announced in September of 2010 along with the iPad. And the event was really about the iPad and the things that it could do. But the iPod Touch was also a significant part of the Apple event. They showed off to the audience the new edge-to-edge design that kind of paved the way for what the iPad 2 looks like. They also announced that it would run iOS 4.1, which would then be free to upgrade from there. The iPod Touch 4 came with some features that people wanted to have in the iPod Touch since it was released. Apple finally listened and implemented these features. At the bottom of the iPod, you have an actual loudspeaker rather than just some sound coming out of the dock connector. On the front side of the iPod, you have a home button as well as a Retina display. Now don't be deceived, this Retina display is not the same one as they put on the iPhone 4. This is a Retina display, but it inverts when you look at it at a certain angle, so it may not be the best Retina display, but it is decent. On the back of the iPod, you have the rubber buttons. The buttons are basically on the back side, but it could be on the side, but I don't know if the iPod Touch 4 has much of a side. But anyway, the back has the iPod and Apple logo as well as the FCC labels and storage marker. This iPod is only an 8GB model because I don't care that much. But moving on to the top of the iPod, you see that the Wi-Fi antenna is not present. Where did it go? Well, it's inside the iPod. They didn't need to cut a hole in this one to transmit the signal. The camera on this iPod is not really much intended to take pictures, but rather to utilize the FaceTime feature. The rear-facing camera is a 0.7 megapixel camera with no optical image stabilization, and the front-facing camera is a 0.3 megapixel VGA camera. This iPod does have tap to focus on both cameras, which are a really good thing, but you can only record at 720p at 30 frames per second on both sides. Pictures will be shown to you at cringe level right now. The inside of the iPod is better than the previous iPod with a new Apple A4 chipset, but there is only 256 megabytes of RAM. That is the same amount of RAM as the 3rd gen. The battery on this iPod is only a 930 mAh battery, which is better than the 730 mAh on the 3rd gen, but the battery isn't good in general anyway. I will tell you that the battery does charge pretty fast on the iPod, but it doesn't last too long. You also have Bluetooth, which is only Bluetooth 2.1. The iPod Touch 4 does pretty decent on light tasks and doesn't fester too much on load. Temple Run games well with the 3-axis gyro as well as Safari loading a picture-heavy website. The App Store loads in about 20 seconds, which is typical for something this old. But really, what iPods do best is app music. Luckily, this iPod has the nice cover flow feature that should exist in the modern world. I want to talk about repairability with this iPod Touch 4th generation. iPod Touches generally are harder to repair than iPhones and most iPads, but I will tell you that this iPod Touch here stands out of all the devices. This iPod may not be challenging to get into, but it is tough to repair. You're almost guaranteed to fail to fix this iPod, and here's why. First of all, the screen ribbon cables are on top of the iPod under the motherboard. The motherboard is held down by screws, other ribbon cables, as well as other components. It is tedious to get the cable off and almost impossible to get the cable back on. I have even tried to do it myself, but not on this iPod Touch. Only a few succeed at any repair with this iPod Touch. Hugh Jeffries recently attempted to repair this iPod Touch, and in short, he pretty much gave up. You're basically breaking the iPod more and more as you're trying to fix it. There's also much glue and crevices to where if you do something wrong, you will break a part of the iPod. The iPod Touch 4th generation is basically just about unfixable, but luckily this is the only iPod Touch that is this way. Now this iPod Touch here was purchased on eBay for about $30 and came running iOS 6. Now as you have seen, this iPod runs decently on iOS 6, and I'm glad Apple didn't put iOS 7 on this thing. This iPod Touch was manufactured on May 17th, 2011. This means that this iPod Touch would have ran iOS 4.3.3. This iPod is not on iOS 4.3.3 anymore, but it is running iOS 6.1.6, which was released in 2014 because of the problem with 6.1.3. So this iPod is almost 9 years old, and it is held up pretty well for 9 years. No cracks or dinks and no LCD or other component problems. It is a fully working iPod Touch 4, and I plan on keeping it fully working. But if it stops working, then a tribute will only go to it. That's all I have to say about this iPod Touch. It is an excellent iPod to use for music purposes, but not really for anything else. You could use it as a movie player for a kid if you really want to, but that's all it's good for anymore. Thank you guys for watching this video. Make sure you go like this video and consider subscribing if you like what you see. Also, go check me out on Instagram and Twitter at AlumniTech47, which I will link down below. Again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.